Multiversus is a game that took a lot of people by surprise. It's a free-to-play Super Smash Bros. Style fighting game, but instead of Nintendo characters, it has Warner Brother ones. And if any company could potentially rival Nintendo with incredibly popular IP, it was going to be Warner Bros. As of 2022, Warner Bros. Owns more than 12,000 feature films and over 2,400 TV shows that comprise tens of thousands of individual episodes. This includes every Cartoon Network character, every DC Studios character, and some insanely popular movie characters you probably never knew they even had the rights to. You could see immediately why people were so hyped for this game, as the possibilities were essentially endless. They could pretty much add any character you could think of in the span of a few weeks, and the character selection at launch was a good showcase of that. It went from having some popular Cartoon Network and Looney Tunes characters to a Game of Thrones character and even Iron Giant. The roster at launch was mostly filled with nostalgic and highly beloved characters that people couldn't wait to see in action, which really helped propel the game's hype even further, especially when the game also included dedicated voice acting for each character, something another crossover fighting game lacked. When it launched its closed alpha in May 2022, people were skeptical of things like the monetary system and battle pass, but for the most part praised the gameplay, which is what most people cared about, especially for a game that is free to play, so is expected to have microtransactions anyway. Finally, the open beta released to everyone on July 26, 2022, and as expected, the game was a huge success. And the very next day, Multiversus hit its all-time peak of over 150,000 players, just on Steam alone, which is a crazy number that not one Steam game was even close to in that month. Multiversus had a fairly smooth launch, offering team modes, 1v1s, custom matches, a practice mode, tutorials, a battle pass, and best of all, LeBron James. The game did offer a variation of different modes, while also promising some important new ones in the future, like a ranked and arcade mode. Although the battle pass felt more like a teaser pass, as it only offered 15 tiers and free cosmetics overall. So it didn't offer a lot, but it was also pretty cheap to make up for that. And it offered the Uncle Shagworthy skin, which obviously made the entire battle pass a masterpiece. And talking about skins, most of the cosmetics for this game were pretty cool looking, and some of them offered unique voice lines too, which is a nice touch, but damn were they expensive. Having to pay £15 for a gold Superman or a Batman animated skin is pretty crazy. Who do they think they are? Blizzard. But the game is free to play, so once again, it's not the biggest deal in the world. In terms of balancing, the game was a little rocky, but it's pretty difficult to have a completely balanced roster of characters at launch, especially with such a diverse group of them. Iron Giant alone was a pretty broken character, which isn't exactly surprising seeing as how comically massive he is compared to everyone else. A lot of his attacks would just have massive hitboxes, making combos incredibly easy to pull off, while also being extremely harsh on the enemy player. And Bugs Bunny was probably the strongest character ever at this time. With his insane combat potential and vast movement options, he was almost unbeatable in most matchups. Finn was also broken, mostly because of his backpack that still gives me PTSD just thinking about it. Don't know what the hell he kept in there, but it definitely wasn't anything soft, I'll tell you that. Apart from these gripes though, the game was very well received and really impressed the majority of players. From most of the characters having their original voice actors and having unique voice lines depending on who they're against or teaming up with, to the creative movesets and animations for each character. My favourite being Tom and Jerry, who literally try and attack each other throughout their moveset. You could just tell the developers were putting their all into this game, and it showed. The only question was, could they keep this up? Season 1 was supposed to be released on August 8th, but because of some unknown issues, it was delayed until August 15th. The update included many bug fixes and tweaks to characters and perks, while also bringing a new and expanded battle pass. But that's not all, as a new character was also teased for August 23rd. Also, let me just say, the Rick and Morty collab has actually aged like milk. For the most part, this season was a little underwhelming since the launch didn't include any new characters for another week, on top of there already being a week delay. But the battle pass was enough to keep most people busy. The new battle pass had 50 tiers now instead of the prior 15, but was also more expensive because of that. And it was good. Not amazing, but good. There were a couple good cosmetics, like a Tom and Jerry detective outfit and LeBron James dressed as Robin, which is exactly the kind of content I wanted for LeBron, let me just say. Also, the character changes were actually really good. Characters that needed nerfed got nerfed, like Bugs Bunny and Finn, while other weaker characters like Taz and Arya got buffed. Some of these changes may not have been enough to fully balance these characters yet, but it was a pretty good start. So overall, Season 1's launch was a success, and the season may have started a bit slow, but at least there was new content on the horizon. So the 23rd came around and Morty was finally released, and he had some interesting moves. He was a much more complicated character to pick up and play compared to most other characters in the game, which is a great change of pace. And on release, many people found him to be a pretty weak character, but over time he was seen as the complete opposite. Whether it was more time to learn the character, balance improvements, or a mix of both, he became one of the strongest characters in the game in most people's eyes. Morty was a great addition to the game and the perfect character to entertain players until the next new addition to the roster was added. Rick was the obvious next character to be added after Morty, but the time it was taken to add him was draining the hype for his release. So Warner Bros done what anyone would do in this situation and decided to announce Gizmo from the Gremlins. This is what I mean when I say Warner Bros could add anyone. Gizmo released on September 8th and was a complete wild card. I don't think anyone really knew what his moveset was going to be since he was such a passive character in the movie. He's just this adorable little fuzzball throughout it. What could he possibly... So clearly, the movie lied to us. Gizmo was an absolute beast. He could drive a car, shoot a bow, play music, and throw popcorn in your face, all while making adorable little noises. It doesn't get more disrespectful than that. He had some fun combo potential with his popcorn and bow, and also had some pretty quick movement, making him a tough opponent for players to counter. And although he was definitely the most interesting new character to be added, mechanically and just conceptually, players seemed unimpressed. Since September was Multiversus' first big drop in players, going from over 41,000 on average to just over 8,000, while also having a peak of 22,000 players compared to 140,000 players just the month before. This was a huge dip, but why? And I think the answer is pretty simple. There was just not enough new content. Yes, they were adding new characters every now and again, but that was pretty much it. Their entire player base up to this point was almost entirely built on waiting for new character releases instead of new maps, patches, or modes. And keep in mind, the only content other than characters that had been added in 4 months of development were some patch notes and some new cosmetics. And even with their new content being solely focused on new character releases, they only managed to release one every 3 or 4 weeks. So it's not surprising that players eventually started to lose interest. But it does suck, because the content that would be put out was good, but there just wasn't enough of it to keep people's attention. Over 1 month later after Morty's release, on the 27th of September, Rick Sanchez was finally added to the roster. And although it took longer than expected, he definitely didn't disappoint when he finally arrived. As expected, Rick was the wackiest character yet. Almost as wacky as those text messages from Justin Roiland. He could shoot rockets, make himself massive, and best of all, place portals, giving him the ability to teleport himself, enemies, and projectiles between them, which as you can imagine allowed for some crazy combos to be executed. This was my personal favourite new character to be added to the game just because of his sheer potential to outclass pretty much any opponent, and his portal mechanic was always something I wanted to see implemented in a fighting game like this. His moves on their own were pretty strong, but paired with his portals they were extremely fun and had a lot more potential to them. So yeah, another great addition to the game, and one that may have taken a little long to be added, but it was worth it in the end. Although I think the long gap between Morty's release and Gizmo's surprise release in between hindered what could have been a much more popular new character. If you thought Gizmo was deadly, wait until you hear about Stripe. Stripe was basically the big bad guy in Gremlins, and he was released on October 12th, and as expected, he was an absolute nut job. He is still regarded as one of the best, if not the best, character in the game. He has a revolver for range, a skateboard for mobility, and crazy combo-ridden melee attacks. He even has a chainsaw. Although Stripe was a great character and was different enough from Gizmo to deserve to be added, I will say adding a second character from Gremlins almost back to back may not have been the best idea, especially when the game's losing players and needs a new character to really grab people's attention. Most players that didn't come back for Gizmo most likely weren't going to come back for Stripe. But that being said, he was a great addition. I just think it would have been smarter to add him later down the line. This update did include something else though, and that was finally adding new content other than a character, and that was a Halloween event. And I've got to say, it kinda sucked. So listen, the Halloween cosmetics were great, I really liked them, especially the Tom and Jerry one. Like, look at it, man. Come on, it looks sick. But the premise of the event was just extremely lame. You basically played matches and earned candy after them, getting 20 candy for a win and 10 for a loss. And you could also get double that if you wore a Halloween skin. And you could use this candy to get either cosmetics or gold, which is a good idea, if executed right. The problem is, how much you needed compared to how much you would earn. So there were 4 cosmetics you could buy: a pumpkin patch profile picture for 150 candy, a jack-o'-lantern emote sticker for 500 candy, a mummy rain dog skin for 3000 candy, and a Jake skin for a whopping 12,000 candy. Now the Jake skin looks good, right? But not 12,000 candy good. Like, come on now. So let's say you bought a Halloween skin and you were wearing it to make double candy, which most players probably wouldn't be doing immediately, but still, you would still have to win 300 games just to get the Jake skin alone. And that's if you win back to back for 300 games, which is just crazy. But don't worry, you could also exchange 500 candy for a mind-blowing 10 gold. Now, these exchange rates are what truly make Halloween scary. This event was just a wasted opportunity for something that could have been pretty cool. The fact that most of the Halloween skins couldn't even be bought with candy also sucked, since they were obviously going to be the best ones. If the rates were better and all the Halloween skins were accessible with candy, it would have been a much better event. The next update was on October 30th and featured another new character, Black Adam, who was added just over a week after the release of the Black Adam movie. Unlike normal for these new fighters, he was very fun to play. He had a unique selection of moves where he could block projectiles, shoot lightning, and even fly for a bit. He was a strong but fairly slow character, making him easily punishable but extremely deadly if mastered. And once again, the developers done a great job at fitting a solid new character in the roster, which the immensely popular new movie done nothing but help put eyes on. After 5 months of waiting, they finally added new modes, with the Arcade and Silly Q mode. Arcade mode released in alpha but included 3 different difficulties where you could fight through variants of the game's roster. The mode also featured a boss fight with the strongest character in all of Multiversus, Rain Dog. And you would also become massive randomly mid-fight, because of course you would. It's Rain Dog. While Silly Q definitely fit its name. It would have all different types of modifications to the normal 2v2 mode, which started with a mode where fighters grew in size with the more damage they garnered, while also having item spawns and of course a shrinking battle box, just to make it a little more chaotic. So basically this new mode allowed the developers to add whatever zany idea they could come up with, and let their players go wild with it, which was a perfect new addition to the game, as variation was definitely something Multiversus was in need of, especially when it came to modes. We also got something else new for the first time, or at least almost, which was a new map called Space Jam, which was based on the basketball court in Space Jam 2, which looked cool and everything, but damn did that movie suck. The only issue was that the map was still experimental and wasn't added to actual public lobbies until December 6th. You heard me right. You could only play their first new map in custom lobbies for over a month and a half. And the saddest part is, when it finally was added, it didn't even last a week until it was moved to Silly Q. So although it was cool to see a new map for once, it didn't even end up being added to the normal modes. Apart from that, the closest we got to a new map was a roofless version of the Scooby-Doo Mansion map, which is incredibly depressing. We almost got a new map though, that's something, right? Season 2 finally kicked off on November 14th, and by this point the game was really starting to struggle. Season 2's release had a peak of just over 4,500 players on Steam, which was almost half the player peak they had the month before, which is not the kind of response you want for a brand new season. And what's even worse is Season 2 didn't really offer a whole lot. Although the Battle Pass offered some new content, it was still a pretty big step down from the last one, offering only 4 character outfits compared to last season's 6, some copy and pasted stuff, and worst of all, having an over 40 tier gap between the first and second unlockable outfit, when there's only 50 tiers in the whole pass. And to top it all off, this battle pass took almost double as much XP to get through compared to the last one, which just made it even more of a long and unrewarding grind. On the bright side, they did add a new Silly Q game type called Big Head mode, where, as you'd probably guess, characters had massive domes, while also having some move cooldown reductions. And lastly, they added some new items like proximity proximity mines and bounce pads, and that was pretty much it. Honestly, it felt like they put more time into the extremely overpriced skins for this season than the actual game, because I have to admit these skins did look sick. Even if they added a couple of them in the battle pass, it would have helped improve this season launch by a ton, at least for me. On November 21st, Marvin the Martian was added to Multiversus, and as of recording was the last character to be added to the game. And despite the game's player base diminishing more and more, they still put a whole lot of effort into this character. He was actually one of the most fun characters to play and had a strong set of moves, like his up special that had a spaceship lock onto Marvin's position and shoot a missile, or his iconic disintegration pistol able to hit enemies at range or close by, while also having a move that inflicted a cool effect that made projectiles lock onto enemies. And of course, best of all, his voice lines.
I am ready for combat whenever you are.
You could tell they put a lot of effort into this character, even while knowing he most likely wasn't going to bring a ton of players back. So honestly, I respect that. The next update was on the 13th of December and included a new event for Christmas time, called Festiversus. This event used the same formula the Halloween event did, except instead of candy, you got holiday cookies. The one major improvement with this event, however, is you actually got login rewards too. So you could earn between 150 and 400 cookies pretty much every day, and got a free rain dog skin on one of these days too. Only problem was you could only buy 4 things with these cookies: a gingerbread profile picture for 500 cookies, a Let Snow emote sticker for 1000 cookies, a snowman sledding ring out for 5000 cookies, and a Superman skin for 12,000 cookies, while the other 6 Christmas skins could only be bought with their currency. So it was still a major improvement from the Halloween event with how much you could earn, but there still wasn't enough content to really spend it on. Silly Q also got a new game mode called Snowball Fight, which pretty much played as you'd expect, letting players throw snowballs, and also had some falling ice to keep you on your toes, or sliding on your toes I guess. And finally, after over 6 months of waiting, we finally got a permanent new map, a Game of Thrones map called the Throne Room, which was a good map, but just took way too long to be added, especially since the game's player base was still rapidly declining, and after this new map was eventually added, it would only be played by a small portion of the game's original players. But the game did add one game-changing feature. We may not have gotten a new character, but we did get the best thing of all, The Rock. On January 16th, Multiversus got a New Year's update that didn't add a whole lot. There were some small changes to the Tree Fort and Scooby-Doo Mansion map, and some New Year's cosmetics, but that was about it. Once again, the player count hit a new low, with the game dipping to under 1,000 average players on Steam. The last significant update was on the 13th of February, and was a Valentine's event. And as expected, it pretty much stuck with the same formula as the other events, but this time it was just a complete copy and paste of the Christmas event. It was essentially the same thing, but with candy instead of cookies. And like normal, you could use this candy to buy cosmetics, which included 2 Valentine skins that cost 14,000 candy each. Also, you could receive a free Shaggy skin from daily logins, while the rest of the new skins had to be bought. There was also a new mode in Silly Q called Heartbreaker, where you'd collect hearts during a match, then release a powerful heart wave attack after collecting enough, but you'd also drop hearts whenever you take damage. So overall, it was a pretty good event, and one that was definitely a massive improvement compared to their first one. But there was one last thing they added. After 8 months of patiently waiting, they finally added a ranked mode, which at this point was just a little too late, just a little, as by now the game would get around 700 average players, with the majority of players probably not even being interested in ranked. I mean, if there were any, they probably already quit the game by now. So as good as it was to see it finally be included, I don't think it was that necessary at this point. Multiversus continued to fall in obscurity for the next couple of months, barely reaching 500 average players, and the game's peak hit a new low of only 800 players, and eventually they released a statement. They thanked their players for their remaining support during the open beta and highlighted the main factors they wanted to improve on in its full release. These improvements included more characters, more maps, more modes, improved matchmaking, and improved progression. And to make these much needed improvements, they announced that Multiversus will be shutting down on June 25th and will be fully launched in early 2024, which is a very risky decision. Looking through the history of Multiversus, Multiversus, it's clear to see why it died out so quickly. New content was scarce, but also too rudimentary, as most of these updates would follow the same formula of adding a new character or just some balance and bug fixes. And the most impactful updates to the game were way too separated and just not consistent enough. Also, it didn't help that some of the best updates in the game were implemented so late in the game's development, meaning a lot of players who may have appreciated those changes never really got the chance to. And one last nail in the coffin that most crossover fighting games have suffered from is competition. There's a reason why Smash Brothers is one of the most popular fighting game franchises of all time. It's just a superb lineup of games that Multiversus doesn't even scratch the surface of. And like I said at the start of the video, Multiversus was clearly trying to compete with games like Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. And with a free-to-play product with tens of thousands of different characters to potentially add to the roster, it had an opportunity to create a dent. But at the end of the day, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is just a better game in almost every aspect. And I'd hope so too, since the franchise has had 24 years of evolution. So don't get me wrong, Smash Bros. As a franchise has definitely had some rough patches, but in the end, it became the closest thing you can get to a perfect crossover fighting game, and Multiversus just couldn't compete with that. But you never know, maybe Multiversus will come back in early 2024 and succeed at implementing all the improvements it set out to do. Everyone loves a good redemption story, and perhaps Multiversus will be just that. I guess we'll just have to wait and see, but you can't blame me for being a bit skeptical.